We're moving out of the phase of augmentation into the phase of replacement. And that is a dangerous phase, I think, because we're not giving enough thought to your question, right? Which is what's really important for humans to be doing.
Welcome to Impatient, the podcast where we learn from leaders who aren't waiting for the future, they're building it. Today's guest is someone who has been shaping the future of work long before AI became a buzzword, and someone who I'm honored to join the podcast. Diane Gherson is the former CHRO of IBM, where she pioneered one of the world's first large-scale AI HR transformation. Today, she serves on multiple public and private company boards, including advising leaders on the intersection of AI talent, governance, and enterprise strategy. Few people have had a front row seat to how AI is changing work, from redesigning jobs and developing leaders to helping boards think differently about workforce strategy. That's why I couldn't wait to have her on the show. Diane, welcome to Impatient. It's great to have you.
Oh, it's so great to be here, Josh. And thanks so much for your nice introduction.
I couldn't wait for this, so I'm thrilled to have you on. So what's really amazing is that you were truly a pioneer in AI before it was even in anybody's vocabulary. So I'm curious, while all of us now are starting to sort of dabble in it in some way, shape, or form, what was like the insight for you, or maybe the question that you kept coming back to that convinced you work itself was about to change?
Actually, my use of AI was out of despair. There wasn't any vision, really. It was more I had so much to do and so little money. And so it was really born out of despair. And I mean, I guess my first foray into AI was inferring skills. And I went to the research division of IBM, which already had AI, had it for a decade. And this was back in 2008. And said, look, I need help. We can't have people filling out questionnaires and it's not reliable, it's not valid. We want to know what skills they have because it's a critical success factor for this business. And not only that, but there are hidden skills all over the place. And so, a salesperson would go to a client and the client would say, does IBM have anybody who knows something about X? And they wouldn't know, right? And they wanted to have it on their phone, right? They'd like, I can look it up. I can find that person who's an expert in irrigation in Nigeria, whatever. And I have to say it was one of the most exciting projects. So that enabled me to understand what AI could do, and it was also a design thinking project. So it helped me think differently about work and how work can get done. So that altogether, it was fantastic. So then, when I became head of HR, because I was head of talent at that point, when I became head of HR in 2013, my CEO declared that in 3 years, half of our business would be in new technology and new products, right? So half our portfolio was going to change. And it was a $96 billion portfolio. And I froze. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? So, where are we going to find people with these skills? And so, again, AI jumped to the rescue because, we could figure out who had adjacent skills and who could be upskilled. But more than that, we were able to connect it to learning, right? So people knew what their skills were. And then they knew, because we told them, where they fell in terms of the relevance of their skills to our future, right? So, and then what were the adjacent skills to get to more relevant skills? And so they had personalized learning. So that was, again, using AI, we did that. And then, we wanted to connect it to openings. So because, a lot of the really best people, their managers might not let them want to go, but we wanted them to go because these were the new jobs that they needed. So then we would show them, you have an 80% match to this job that's open in blockchain. Do you want to move? Right. So, so that was really how I got into it. It was despair. I mean, there was so much to do. And then at the same time, I was being asked to, cut my budget, right? So that was why in the end we said, well, look, we're able to answer questions that right now our service center is answering using AI. And I had trained my people. So they were at the time even like writing their own chatbots and things like that. I had trained HR in coding at that point. But that was the beginning of, an agent, because at that point, not only could the a virtual rep actually answer your questions, but could actually do the transaction for you. So, if you were on Workday, it would do it for you, right? So you wouldn't just ask, how do I transfer, Susie to the next division, but it would do it all for you. And it would ask you, is this person getting an increase? And then it would go to the manager, the new manager, and say, here are the guidelines and here's what people at this level are normally paid and so forth. So, it was starting to act actually more like an HR business partner. And so then at that point we said, okay, again, we got to cut our budget. Let's eliminate HR business partners. And we started at the manager level, at first line manager, and it got better and better. And my successor, has eliminated it for everyone. So everyone's using the agent, including the CEO, and it answers 96% of questions, and the other 4% go, as exceptions to a separate group. When you think about it, then you go back to your question, why do we need HR business partners if the goal is to make managers self-sufficient? If the goal is to make everyone self-sufficient,
Yeah.
right, then what jobs should exist? I think that's the most important question we should be asking. The HR business partner, is helping the manager getting the most out of their people, hiring, firing, performance management, so forth. But the goal is for them to be self-sufficient in all those things, because that, after all, is the manager's job. So, I think that was sort of what I ended up with. But again, through sort of all this, windy road, that in the end, let's make sure that all the jobs are self-sufficient, and then we'll have the right jobs, and we'll be investing in the right jobs. And then let's invest in AI to get everyone self-sufficient.
It's interesting, just going back to the first thing you mentioned about skills inference, which I think generally, when the whole concept of the sort of the skills economy came out in vogue a couple of years ago, and people were really into it, and then it sort of collapsed under its own weight a little bit. It sort of makes me think about, like, if we really lean more into skill inferencing, wouldn't that make it a lot easier?
Sure. I totally
And why
believe in
don't
it.
we?
Yeah. Yeah. It was the backbone of everything we did in IBM, because skills are the future, right? It's not jobs, it's skills. So if you think about it as the lowest common denominator is skills, not jobs, then you can do a whole lot more with people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm a recovering talent leader at my core. And so, so I love your comments about that, and particularly like how we have to think about redesigning work, right? So we spent so much time, so many years in workforce planning, which is now really shifting to truly like, what's the work and how do we design it differently? And so maybe just touching on one of the things you mentioned, which is, what kind of guiding principles would you share of like, what should remain uniquely human? And then what are the things that probably maybe we're getting in our own way that should probably be automated, where we should lean more heavily into AI, or just in general, these are the types of things that should be automated or AI first?
Well, look, I mean, we're moving out of the phase of augmentation into the phase of replacement. And that is a dangerous phase, I think, because we're not giving enough thought to your question, right? Which is what's really important for humans to be doing. And there aren't good enough principles out there, right? I think the most important principle is that every job is meaningful. Um, and that way you can avoid creating jobs where you're babysitting the technology, which is unfortunately what I'm seeing, right? Whether it's QAing it or, I mean, these all cause cognitive atrophy, right? All of these babysitting jobs. So I think we need to avoid those, and we need to create jobs that actually have outcomes, and outcomes that matter, right? And so that they're
Right.
meaningful jobs. And if we start there, as opposed to what can the technology do, then we'll have a good set of principles, I think. But unfortunately, I'm seeing too many companies start with, well, what can the technology do? And then we'll just arrange the people around the technology, which is exactly what we did in the factory. We arranged the people around the technology in the factory, and we created, mind-numbing jobs. And that's not what we should be doing with white-collar work.
Yeah, 100%, which is, we think about the leadership pipeline and, starting with how the role of entry level jobs, which in many ways was to cut your teeth and learn. And then I'm a big disciple of the book, The Leadership Pipeline, where you make different leadership turns. How do you
Yes.
see AI reshaping that? And how should we be thinking about that, differently?
I think that is the singular challenge facing CHROs right now. I think you just nailed it. Because everyone is thinking in a static way, right? So I'm a brand manager in marketing. I understand the nuances of our reputation and our brand, and I understand, what taste we would have. I have that sort of understanding of taste around what's appropriate, what's not appropriate to our brand. I learned that by being a junior brand manager. And now, I'm a senior brand manager and I am overlooking, a whole bunch of agents. And I never did that work. So, how do I have that intuitive understanding to be able to do my job? Or I'm a manager in HR and I know where to make exceptions. Why? How did I learn that? I learned it from the people around me, right? Now, can you codify that into AI? Of course you can. But guess what? The CEO changes, my senior manager changes, and what's okay to be an exception changes because they have a different philosophy. And so it's that intrinsic understanding that we have as humans that has to be translated down the pipe. And that's why preserving jobs that create those experiences is critical. Now, having said that, it won't be the same jobs, right? I get that. But you could create sort of a rotational path back to your idea of a pipeline so that you are going to be able to manage agents and use your intrinsic understanding of how things work around here. And exercise judgment. But at the end of the day, it's judgment. We're being paid with AI, we'll be paid for judgment, and we have to figure out how to build judgment. But I don't get me wrong. I know AI is really good at a lot of things. One of the things that happened this week is Claude is now on Slack, right? So Claude's on Slack, and then, whoever it is from whatever company you use is sitting in on all your video calls. So do you think that Claude or whatever, your AI is developing social intelligence? Absolutely. How do decisions get made? Who needs, a lot of data to make a decision? Who doesn't need a lot of data? Who tends to look for, corroboration from, their peers before they make it, all those things. It's all available now to AI. So I think social intelligence probably is not one of those things that will be uniquely human. But there are others. There are others, and I think they're more around what I just covered.
Interesting. Wow. So social intent, wow, that's really, that is, I think, incredibly provocative. That was probably arguably one of the things that we felt like was the thing that
Yes.
humans could
Right.
preserve. But at
Right.
the rate of rapid learning, that's really
If
fascinating.
you're listening into every conversation that's going on in your company, you're developing a database, right? About how decisions get made, how people operate, who likes who. It's pretty amazing, actually, what Claude can do.
So what's interesting is when you look back, when you first started experimenting with these things, I'm sure you were enamored by what it could do. And as you mentioned, it's also out of necessity, but were you thinking about what the did you even envision what some of these
Yeah.
implications would be back then? And how do you think about that now as one of the early pioneers?
Yeah. So look, it has its pros and cons. And my first experience with AI actually went back to sentiment analysis. And it was in, I want to say 2013, maybe 2014, I got off a plane and I had about 17 messages from my assistant. So I called her up and I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "You got to go to this site." And I went to this site and there was a manifesto to IBM written by 86 people or signed off by 86 people. And it was growing as I was looking at it, right? And it was because, and this is back in 2014, right? Because apparently we had stopped expensing Uber. All right. So everyone was up in arms. How can I get to my client? Da, 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 da. Everyone was furious and how stupid we were and blah, blah, blah. And so I went onto the site and I said, "Hi, I'm your head of HR. And I just want you to know I just read your stuff and I'll be back." So I called my head of operations. He knew nothing about it. And so he had to go all the way down the pipe to this person at the bottom who had made this decision. And fine. This person had decided that since someone had been robbed in an Uber, had your suitcase taken, that therefore it wasn't safe. All right. So I said, okay, well, we're reversing that. And then I went on the site and I said, thanks for raising all the important points you've made. And so, we're reversing it. And here's why. And the next day, the Wall Street Journal, had an article, Yahoo Finance had an article, and it was all over the place because, IBM, not known for being quick, had responded within 12 hours to this list. By then it was, 362 by the time we were done that had signed off on this. And, and it was, instead of the article being how stupid we were not letting people use Uber, it was an article about, how quick we were. And so that was like, wow, this is very cool that I'm able to do this. But then I said, okay, well, how did we know? Like, how did we find this? Well, sure enough, we were listening, right? But we were listening to high notes and low notes, not to what people were actually saying. And so it was important for me to then communicate to IBMers to say, we're not listening to what you're saying. But what we are looking for is high notes and low notes. And if there's a lot of low notes going on in it, we want to understand why. But it was still, there's the creepiness factor that I was very concerned about. Because by then everyone had woken up that, oh my God, she's listening, right?
Right,
So,
right.
so it was a moment for me to realize that we needed some ethics guidelines around just because you can doesn't mean you should, which was our motto. And so we developed a set of ethics guidelines that we shared with all of our employees around how we were going to use AI.
With great responsibility comes great power, right? So just go back a little bit to the leadership pipeline. So now we need to rethink entry level roles in a way that are materially
Yep.
changing, and they're going to be more sort of critical problem solvers, I think, than task focused. How do you think about succession planning and executive development? And maybe is the plus side to this that potentially we actually could accelerate executive, like CEO succession potentially through simulations and things, or I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts around just succession planning in general and executive development in this new era?
Yeah, look, I don't know if we've figured out succession planning as a function yet. I mean, look at the number of CEOs that have failed in the last 2 years, right? I mean, come on, right? HR's been failing, and boards have been failing. And I've been part of a board that failed on that. So I'm just not sure we have good answers for succession planning. I do think assessment is really important. And I don't know if it's given enough attention by boards.
Yeah.
They're lagging, and so we can't just blame HR. I think boards are lagging, but I do think that there is much more that can be done using unstructured data to learn about candidates. One of the things when I was at IBM, I'm very proud of the process we went through there. And I shared videos of town halls of our candidates with our board members. Now, these board members thought they knew, the candidates because they came and presented to them. Very different picture when they were asked challenging questions in town halls. Woo! So there is a lot of unstructured data out there, and it needs to be collected by HR, and it needs to really get at what's this person really like in a crisis? What's this person really like, when they have difficult news to share? How are they handling, decisions that involve people that they care about? These are, these are important. What do they do when somebody dies in their unit?
Yeah, 100%, and how quickly do they pivot? And I think to your point about, say, taking the unstructured data, identifying those talent markers that are really most predictive of success. I mean, that's something actually you were really piloting
Yeah.
that many years ago. That is something that I think we need to have more patience for, because I really think that's one of the real benefits. And I do wonder, and I don't know what this looks like yet, but just I do believe in simulations, and how can we use different experiences with AI and so forth to create executive simulations to really almost give them more experience, because they're going to be things that they've never done before.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, it's developing their frame, right? Like sometimes they've grown up, just in finance, whatever, and they haven't had the experiences of negotiating with a customer or things like that. So, I mean, I think we can be much more now that agents are doing more of the work. We can be moving people around a whole lot more into
100%.
different roles, so that they can develop some domain expertise, but also some experiences that give them insight, that enables them to see around corners when they're CEO, if they're CEO, and it improves their judgment, right? So I do think there are obviously more things we and some companies are doing it already, but the idea of a career architecture for for high potentials is something that needs more work, I think, in most companies.
You had recently mentioned on LinkedIn that HR really sort of needs to reclaim work design,
Yeah.
and that, come back to the lost art of OD and OE. Going back to early to what our point is. I'd love for you to talk more about that.
I was schooled in socio-technical systems design, which was an attempt by in industrial companies to make jobs more meaningful, blue collar jobs more meaningful, and therefore have more pride, have more outcome orientation, and so forth. And you probably remember Volvo had a team that made a whole car, right? So they didn't just sit on an assembly line and turn a widget. They actually, as a team, from the moment the steel came into the factory to when it rolled, the car rolled off into the warehouse, they did everything, right? They owned that car. So we did that at Shell, and I learned the methodology, and it's basically around where do things go wrong, and you look at making sure that you've got people accountable for where you don't have a handoff where things go wrong, right? So you've got people accountable around things that go wrong, and therefore we actually didn't need managers, and so we took out the manager layer. So I have some, very long ago experience with work design, and it's pretty powerful, but I don't think it translates to white collar work that well. I think that methodology for white collar work is still eluding us. I'm very frustrated by it because HR needs to rise to this challenge, needs to draw on people who can help with this. We need a handbook on how to do it. Now, the closest I can get to it is to start with outcomes and work backwards. And then, as I mentioned before, if one of the outcomes is self-sufficiency for jobs that have business outcomes, then you don't start with, how can we make an HR business partner more effective, right? We start with, do we need an HR business partner because they're supporting a manager, right? So how do we make the manager more effective? So you've got to start in the right place with the business outcomes and go from there. So there's that. Then you've got to guard against brain rot, the cognitive atrophy problem, which you get by minding the AI. So make sure that the tasks and outcomes actually create critical thinking pivots, right? So that's one. The second thing is you got to avoid brain fry, which is another issue, which is when all you're dealing with all day is complex problem solving, and you're every time you're dealing with an agent, you've got to re-engage where the agent was, right? You haven't followed the whole thing along, but you've got to jump in and look at what they've done, and redirect. And so that's a whole other, form of burnout that we're discovering. And BCG's done some good work on this. And so we don't want brain fries. We don't want brain rot. We don't want brain fries. So how do we develop a job a job that is and a work design that gives people an ability to processing time, and isn't just jumping from one agent to the other and causing people not to be able to focus.
Yeah, I love that. That is, it's interesting. It's the sort of tried and true principles of org design, which is first start with your design principles, which in many ways you could say that for now, as we think about work, those things that you mentioned are really actually core design principles, right?
Yeah,
Which is,
yeah,
start with the outcomes in mind. Think about designing jobs that don't don't make you dumber, and then it give you the appropriate balance, and so it's actually it's in a lot of ways it's really interesting way to think about using the same playbook, just asking a different set of questions.
right, right, and then the flow of work, because it's not the job, the flow. How is the flow of work now going to be redirected in a different way? I look, a lot of people make a big deal out of speed, and it is exciting that AI is fast. But let's face it, for some actions, speed doesn't really matter. I'm constantly getting in my inbox, people who've designed an app that they're, AI that they want me to look at, and they're always about speed. Oh, it takes so long to make a decision and now it'll speed up. I'm like, who cares, right? Like, I can
Right.
keep doing I'm left sitting on the edge of my chair waiting for a decision to be made by, somebody about something I sent them an email about 2 hours ago, right? It doesn't really matter to me if it takes them a week, because it's not an important decision in the flow of work, right? Not holding up a business issue. So there's some of this speed thing that we've got to, put on some alarms and say, is it important to the business outcome? Does it interfere with the other priorities to have speed here? So there's some of that needs to come into the work design as well.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point because it's like the sort of the old project management triangle. You got to pick two: speed, cost, quality.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
if you over index on one, it comes at the expense, to your point, of the outcomes of the quality. And by the way, the cost, I think one of the things we're probably going to learn pretty quickly is that the cost of these tokens is probably more than the cost of some of than the people we have
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
doing the
No,
work. So
absolutely. I was talking with the head of HR at a chip company where they have chip design engineers, and they have chip design uh, verifiers or something like that, and the verifiers are in India and the design engineers are here, and oh my goodness, AI could do all the verification. So within a week they had spent $400,000 in tokens, which is like more than the
right.
whole team in India for the month, right? So it didn't translate to any savings.
Talked about how AI is redesigning work, but it's also like it's redesigning how we as leaders need to think and operate. And then what's our responsibility in terms of really reskilling the workforce, and how do we manage through what is arguably going to be one of the most significant workforce disruptions we've
Yeah,
experienced. And so, you and I talked about this, and I know I love your perspective. I know you're really passionate. It's like, what do you think our leadership obligations come with these changes? Who's responsible for the workforce, the broader workforce, and getting them
yeah,
skilled in the AI
yeah.
economy?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question, Josh. I mean, at IBM, it was really important for us to reskill first because our technology, we've always been a technology company, and we relied on people growing up to understand how IBM worked and all of that. So we were always an academy company, I guess. But not many companies are academy companies. So I go back to, again, the whole concept of desperate, right? So I'm working with a company right now where we've mapped out what jobs they're going to have a surplus of, and what jobs they're going to have a gap in. And not surprisingly, the gap is data engineering, right? Which goes into
Mhm.
like a whole array of different really important tasks to keep this business going in its new AI, version. Well, data engineers are really hard to find and they're very expensive. But they do have people with some of the requisite skills who can be upskilled into data engineering roles. Data architect, data, there's a variety of different data engineering jobs, but they do have some of those people, rather than compete at some astronomical level to get, a whole array of data engineering, a whole new data engineering department,
Yeah.
they can bring people up. So I think you're going to see some of that for sure, but there's still going to be people left behind. And I saw, Gina Raimondo, who used to be the Secretary of Commerce.
Yep.
She's gotten together with, and now I've forgotten one, I guess it was a Pennsylvania senator. Anyway, Republican. And they are
Yep. Heard
looking
about
at
that.
this very carefully. You've seen this, I think it's called Raise Us or something. And they're looking at public policy solutions and saying, look, the unemployment insurance was invented during the Depression. It's not really appropriate now. We've got to rethink what that looks like. Of course, you're hearing about universal basic income. And then, should we be allocating, tax dollars to companies so that they can upskill their people? So those are the sorts of things that are being discussed. I truly believe in the upskilling. I am very concerned about universal basic income.
I feel like the answer has to be some type of public-private partnership. And in the spirit of sort of open source learning, which probably wouldn't be that expensive, and I think could actually be in the best interest of many companies, particularly companies that are looking to attract talent, working with
Yeah.
the government. If we really wanted to simplify this and said, there are maybe 3 or 4 skills in your opinion, or capabilities, maybe broader capabilities, that we want people to be really good at, or good enough to be able to adapt in this new world, what would you say? What would you rattle off and say, these are the things that I think are most important?
Well, I mean, obviously, critical thinking. We need that. We're going to need that as a civilization. We're going to need people who can.
There seems to be a
Um,
deficit in that, though. but
yeah,
anyway,
and
sorry.
so schools again are going to
Yeah.
have to really do that. I mean, there's so much data now around how critical thinking is being eroded. And it's interesting that now they're doing oral exams, right, to see if the critical thinking is there, because otherwise you never know.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to find workarounds to make sure that the critical thinking is there and that we can help people understand where they've got lapses so that they can correct them. So I think that's going to be something really, really important. Curiosity is something that you're probably born with, but to encourage it, to nurture it, I think is going to be really, really important. I mean, it's the usual list, right? People who can break apart problems. I mean, one of the really sad things about even people studying computer science now is that they're learning how to build LLMs. They're not learning how to code. And so they're showing up at work. Yes, they know how to build LLMs, but do they know how to break apart a problem? No, they don't. You learn that when you learn how to code. But breaking apart problems is a lifelong skill, right? We can all use it in our home and everything else. But if you've never actually sharpened that capability, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think we talked about this last time we met, which is, to your point, it's like critical thinking and intellectual curiosity. You can't have enough of it, right? And I think that's the basis. And that's what makes AI so powerful. Like if you have that, there's so much you can do. Ultimately, we're going to have to become much more adaptive and be able to pivot more quickly. And we're going to have to find ways to almost retrain the way we think and adapt. And so this concept of adaptive execution is going to be really hard. But I do think fundamentally, like if we could retrain the workforce on these things so they could use AI in a way to adapt and pivot more, fastly.
Yeah, I do think we're going to leave a lot of people behind if it moves as fast as we think it's going to move. And it's kind of it's good and bad that we may end up actually having a slowdown, right? We could have a slowdown simply because we've got a lot of people resisting AI, and you're seeing the numbers. I mean, what, 80% now feel like AI is going to be destructive of their personal careers. The numbers are very high, and you saw the booing and the commencement speeches and so forth. So we've got a negative audience here, and that's important. And then the second thing is you've also got the data center problem and, not in my backyard and the pollution and the use of water and, all of the things that are coming out that cause people to say, I don't like that. And then you've got the fact that the companies are going public and they're going to charge more for their tokens. So all of those things, three things, could actually slow us down and give us a chance to really adapt. On the other hand, we probably cause a collapse in our stock market and our bond markets, because the bond markets are funding the data centers and the stock market is expecting to see growth.
So you sat in the seat of a C-suite executive CHRO. Now you're
Yeah.
on multiple boards. I'd love to know what's maybe been the biggest learning for you, particularly related to this conversation, right? Just in terms of how you're really governing organizations and providing advice and counsel. What's been the biggest change for you sitting on the other side of the table? Like, what are some of the things you've learned the most, maybe, that you wish you knew actually when you're on the
Yeah.
other side?
I think it's, I wish I'd spent more time as a CHRO focused on the culture of the board. Um,
Hmm.
and, you tend to be a servant of the board, right, when you're a CHRO, but actually there's no one paying attention to the culture of the board. And if you don't, it's a problem, right? I mean, maybe if the CEO is, that's great. But they usually, again, have other concerns when they deal with their board. So I would say that's my biggest eye opener, is that, there is a need for someone to be paying attention to the culture, particularly groupthink. I think we've all become way too enamored of the sort of checklist of experiences and skills that we put in our proxy, and we check all the boxes, but we don't actually check boxes around diversity of thought. That is so important. You need to have different people who attack issues in different ways. You've got to have people who know how to collaborate, yes, but you need some people who spark discussions, and push back and challenge. So there's a need to be looking at personal characteristics, is I guess where I'm going, in the nominations committee. And so to the extent that CHROs are working on that, I think they need to be paying more attention to it.
If you were giving advice to CHROs who want to get on a board, what advice would you give them? What maybe were some of the ahas for you?
I think having a business impact is really important for any board member, including a CHRO. So I think focusing on what are the outcomes of what I did, not HR outcomes, business outcomes. That I think is really important. That in the end, that's your legacy, right? So I think more than anything else, it's what were your business outcomes.
Yeah, and marketing yourself in that way. We're going to transition and we're going to close out with our speed round. Complete this sentence. In 2 years, the best CHROs will spend far less time on X and far more time on Y.
I think definitely less time on emails, and just figuring out which emails to answer and when and all that stuff, because AI will do all that and even answer some of your emails. If you have an agent, it'll be doing a lot of that for you. So I think emails become less of a distraction, which enables you to focus more on your priorities.
All right. So going back to the board piece. So for an executive who wants to land their very first board seat in the next year or two, what's the smartest move they can make right now to prepare?
I wish I had a good answer to that. I mean, all of my board seats have been, and I've been on 4 boards. One went private, so that one I'm no longer on. But um, they were all happenstance. They were all sort of my network, and
Yeah.
somehow my name came up, but they weren't search firms coming after me. But anyway, I know a lot of people, we spend time talking with, their client, they're the clients of search firms, and each search firm has their own board, their board capability. And so to be introduced to the board person is probably a good idea. I did not go down that route, so I can't say how successful that would be, but it sounds like a good idea. And the rest is your network. I mean,
Yeah.
if the 2 of my boards were from someone I had worked with 20 years earlier, right? So that Shows you it's your long-term network.
All right, let's talk about something totally different, like fun. So, if AI could instantly make you master some type of skill that has nothing to do with work, something that you were really passionate about, what would you choose?
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, I think I'd really like to get better at chess. And I'm terrible at it. So
I
if
find that
AI
hard
could
to
help me
believe.
with chess, I think it probably could. Um, or, playing my son, plays poker and keeps asking me to play, and I'm never good at that either. So those are I think get better at certain games. That would be great. I'd love to spend more time on them.
I find that hard to believe that you're not good at chess, by the way. I think you're probably, yeah, I don't know if that's true. But I'd love to be like the lead singer or guitarist for a rock band, which is definitely not going to
Ooh.
happen. All right. So, last question. In the world of work, what are you impatient about?
I'm impatient about work design. I hope that's already come across. It's time, guys. It's time for us to develop that handbook. I'm all in if anyone wants to join me, because it's going to move somewhere else. I even saw Johnny Taylor talk about how bits of HR are moving to other groups, and he mentioned work design was moving to strategy, and I can't think of a worse place for it to go. We have this. We should claim this territory. This is what we are all about, and we need to rise to the occasion.
Oh, well, amen to that. I couldn't agree more. Diane, thank you for this. This has been a great conversation. And I think true to the spirit of impatient, you're really pushing the boundaries and continue to do so. And so grateful for your time. This is awesome. Thanks so much.
It was fun. Thank you so much, Josh.